Hello everybody, Raven Knight here, and welcome back to our third and final installment of our journey through the life of Samson. I'm very excited to finish this up, guys, but we are going to be here for a while. We got a long one today because chapter 16 in Judges, which is where I want you to turn right now if you have a Bible, is a very long chapter, and we got a lot to talk about today. But we are going to talk about something very important in our Christian walk that Samson has to teach us, something that a lot of people don't think about when it comes to Samson. Is this lesson. We think about Samson because he's a strong man. We think about Samson because of just how super powerful he is. The first example that we can probably think of a superhuman individual that God blessed. But Samson has a lot to teach us from this chapter. So again, turn to chapter 16 in the book of Judges. And while you're doing that, if you are brand new to this Bible study series or to what I do on Sundays, welcome. I am the Raven Knight, and every Sunday I do a Bible study video, usually part of a series. We are wrapping up the story of Samson, and we will be moving on to something new next week. If you are a veteran who watches a lot of these, welcome back, and I hope you've been getting something good out of the story of Samson. So today I want to propose a question to you guys before we jump into the reading. What do you think it looks like to be at your lowest? And when I say lowest, I mean at the point where there seems to be no hope, where everything has crumbled and fallen around you. See, one of the common problems Christians face is the delusion of constant success. We fail to realize that quite often God has to break us in order to remake us. So when a Christian reaches their lowest point, which we just talked about, the place where we feel like there is no hope, we often assume that God has just abandoned us, that we cannot be saved, or worse, we just walk away from God because we don't see the success we think we're owed. I've seen that a lot. I've seen a lot of people just say, I'm going through hard times, so I'm tired of following a God who won't get me out of those hard times. But the truth is that quite often, God can truly begin to work through us when He's brought us to our lowest. He can't really use us until He's broken us. He can't really make use of us until we're shattered, until we let go of ourselves, until we realize that without Him, we're nothing. We have to be brought to the lowest point in our lives before God can really bring us to our full potential. And Samson demonstrates that here. So let's see Samson reach the lowest point in the most incredible way. Turn to Judges chapter 16, and we're going to jump to verse 4. We're not going to read verses 1 through 3 because that's preamble. We don't need to worry about that today. We're going to start in verse 4. So let's read. Sometime later, he fell in love, talking about Samson, with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his strength and how we can overpower him, so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. 1,100 shekels of silver from each one of them. So a little bit of background here. Let's take a minute to talk about Delilah and the Philistines. Firstly, Delilah is a figure we only hear about in this chapter of the Bible. We know very little about her backstory or what brought her here. Some say she was a prostitute or some kind of hooker, which is very likely, but we simply don't know. What we do know about her is three things. One is that she was stunningly beautiful, and this can be seen in just how head over heels Samson falls for her. Two, that she is tenacious. She does not let setbacks and mistakes hold her back or damage her chances of victory, which is admirable. And three, she is manipulative and cunning. We're about to watch Delilah pry the truth of Samson's power from his mouth, and all at the behest of the Philistines. And as we can see, the Philistine leaders were each going to offer a substantial amount of silver. Now you might be saying, Raven, how much is 1,100 shekels of silver? That's about 28 pounds or 13 kilograms. And you might think, well, that doesn't sound too much, until you realize that the Philistines don't have one leader, they have 5. The Philistines have 5 leaders, and each one is going to offer that amount. That's a fortune. That is a fortune that could set you up for life. No wonder Delilah is enticed. No wonder Delilah wants to do this. That is insane. You can kind of see why she wants to do it. Well, let's see how she goes about it. This is going to be nuts, and this is a lot of reading. We're going to be going straight through Judges 16:6 all the way through 14. So bear with me, it's a lot of reading. Here we go. So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him up with them. When with men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame, so the secret of his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I become as weak as any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and tied them to him. Then, with men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. Delilah then said to Samson, "All this time you've been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied." He replied, "If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with the pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with pain. Again she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin in the loom with the fabric. Let's talk for just a minute about all that. I know that was a lot, but we need to talk about it. The first thing you might be asking after hearing all that is, how can anyone be so stupid? There's an old saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So what the heck does a third time constitute? Let's start by answering this. Let's start by this. Why does Samson let Delilah do all this? So Delilah walks up to him and says, "Tell me the secret of your power. Tell me how I can weaken you." And Samson just tells her all this stuff. Why would he let her? Why not get suspicious? Wouldn't he immediately kind of look like, why do you want to know that? It'd be like Lois Lane asking Superman what his biggest weakness is. It's a bit sus, right? Well, you got to remember what we're dealing with. A big child. Samson has a real problem with lust. We noticed that when we first read about him, because he saw a woman, a Philistine woman that he did not know and had not talked to, and just said, "I want to marry her. I want to marry this woman. I don't know a thing about her, but I want her." He's got a problem with lust. And in his mind, here's Delilah saying, "How can I weaken you and tie you up?" And he's probably thinking, oh, she wants to get funky. She wants to get a little freaky in bed. Maybe he's into a bit of bondage or dummy play, that kind of thing. So he goes, "Oh, well, if that's what she wants to do, it's all for playing, right? Oh, if you bind me with some fresh bowstrings, that'll do the trick." And of course, who shows up with the Philistines? He busts free easily and takes them out. Well, here comes Delilah. "Oh, you lied to me. What's the real secret?" Now, if I were Samson, my first thought would be, "Yeah, honey, I'm fine, thanks for asking. But why did the Philistines suddenly show up when you thought you bound me up?" But no. Dude goes, "Wow, she really wants to play. Okay, sure. Try brand new ropes that have never been used." Second verse, same as the first, and what does Samson do? Does he say, "Okay, Delilah, what's the deal, honey? What's going on?" No. He's right back at it with the, okay. Let's try this again. This dude is blinded with infatuation. He wants it, and he wants it so bad that he's throwing out any rationality he might have. Guys, he falls for this 3 times. Now, you might say to yourselves, that's ridiculous. I wouldn't fall for this 3 times. I would not fall for the same trick 3 times. Maybe not this one. But let me ask you a question. Have you ever done the same sin multiple times? Have you ever failed in the same way multiple times? Even though you knew the consequences, even though you knew what waited on the other end of it, even though you knew that something was wrong with it, you still fell into it again? You can say it was an accident, but still be honest. Have you fallen for the same sin? It is easy for us to look at Samson and go, "Oh, what a moron. You fell for this 3 times?" But what if we analyzed ourselves? Have we ever wanted something? Have we fallen for infatuation or greed or gluttony or envy or lust or wrath? Have we fallen for a sin so deeply that we do commit it more than once, twice, 3 times, 10 times? Let's not be too harsh on Samson. Many of us are not so different. The difference between us and Samson, though, I would hope, is that we recognize that what we do is wrong and we try to correct it. Mistakes happen. We fall back into bad habits. That happens. Samson isn't even aware that what he's doing is sinning. Or at least he's aware that his time with Delilah is sinning, but he isn't aware of the mistakes he's making. So let's keep going. This gets a lot better. Verse 15. Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the third time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. Now that does give us a little bit of hope about him. Notice here that Samson actually seems to be a tad more responsible. In verse 16, it says that she had to press him for days, ridiculing him, testing him, vexing him. Apparently, Samson wasn't fool enough to give her the truth right away. He did seem to know, I shouldn't give you that. I shouldn't give you that. But Delilah knew how to play with his emotions and push him. She knew how to push him. She pushed him for days, according to this. So he didn't fall for it in one day. It took her days to get it out of him. Folks, let this be a warning. If your girlfriend or boyfriend acts like this, I'm going to go ahead and give you a harsh reality. They don't love you. They are using you. They want something from you. In Samson's case, it's his weakness. But for you, think about what it is they're asking. Here's some common ones. Have sex with me if you really love me. If you really love me, you'd have sex with me. Or, hey, you know what? Do some drugs with me. Come on, you love me, right? Come on, let's both do drugs. I want you to join me. I love you. Or how about, look, give me $100 if you really love me. Look, come on, you love me, right? And I'm in tight with financial situations, okay? And if you really love me, you'll help me out of it. It's just $100. Come on, that's a small price to pay. There are many Delilahs in this world. Many individuals blessed with physical beauty and handsome features that have mastered the art of manipulation. They feel no shame in using the people who lust after them and do not mind hurting you for their own gain. I have fallen for a Delilah in my life, and I was too blind to realize it until she'd already played me like a fiddle. A mistake I still regret to this day. Don't be like Samson or me in this case, please. Don't be like Samson or me. The first thing Samson should have done when she starts asking for his weakness is leave the situation. He didn't. But then on the third try, after the third failure, she pulls the, you don't love me. If you loved me, you'd tell me. That's the first warning sign to me that says, pull out. Get out of this. No one should ever use love as a conditional for your behavior. If you loved me, you'd do blank. That automatically throws up red warning signs. And that's when I say, love should never be a conditional. The love should be unconditional. You can write that down if you want. God is the same way. He does not demand a condition for our love. He loves us unconditionally. There's nothing we can do to make God love us more or less. He loves us unconditionally. Let's move on. Sorry about that. Verse 17. So he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines. Come back once more, he has told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. She then called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free, but he did not know that the Lord had left him. You know, if someone were to write my biography, that last line is the one line I never want them to put in my story. He did not know the Lord had left him. That line alone sends chills down my spine. Why? Why was it just because his hair was cut? Well, see, the hair was the physical connection. It was the promise made. Never cut his hair, or else he will lose all of his strength. That's his physical connection. But there's more to it than that. There's more to it than just the hair, guys. What did Delilah say to the Philistines? Come up again, he's told me everything. In some translations it says, he has bore his heart to me. He has given me all of his heart. He gave her his heart. He gave her everything. He worshipped at her altar. Guys, God is not a tyrant. I know that there are some atheists out there who would tell you that God is just a sky tyrant. He's not a tyrant. How do I know this? Because he's not going to force you to worship or love him. If you make it clear to God you have different priorities and you want to worship something else, God is not going to stand in your way, and he is going to take a few steps back. Samson has made it abundantly clear all his life that his decisions, his actions, and his wants were all aligned with himself and not God. He used God's gifts for his own gain. He flaunted his power like it was a toy, and when his faith and loyalty were tested, he showed just how little value it had by paying a whore with it. Look, it's one thing to fool around in bed with the person you love. And it's one thing to pull practical jokes. They're not cool, but you know what? Whatever. But he bore everything to Delilah, even to the point of giving away his covenant with God. Let me put that in perspective. On my 26th birthday, my dad gave me a revolver that used to belong to my grandfather. It was passed down from my grandfather to my father, and finally to me. It is an old gun, a reliable gun, but an old gun, and it's special to me. So imagine if I went to go sleep with a prostitute, already an inappropriate and ungodly thing to do, but let's use that hypothetical, and to pay for her services, I gave her that revolver. What message does that send? What does that tell you about my thoughts on my grandfather and father? Samson gave up his covenant with God, handed it over, and thus God stepped away because it was a clear sign. You don't love me. You've given up. And so the idea that he did not know God had left him, that line terrifies me. I never want that for me. I can't imagine how horrifying that would be, to still think that God is with you, but have no idea. See, Samson had just taken it for granted that God would just always be there, man. No matter what I do wrong, God's going to be there. No matter what I do wrong, someone's going to get me out of trouble. He's done that his whole life. He screws himself over at the wedding. Well, God's going to give me the strength to throw this practical joke. He runs home to cry to dad and then comes back and realizes that his wife was taken from him because of his bad behavior. Well, God's going to give me the strength to get back at you. The Philistines come and try to attack him when he's all tied up. God's going to give him the strength to get out of that. And when he's thirsty, God's going to give him water. God's going to give me anything I want so I can live however I want. It does not matter. And eventually, I'm going to give up the very thing God promised to me. And I'm not going to realize just how much I've messed myself up. You have to be pretty broken away from God. You have to be pretty distracted from godly things to get to that point. Samson's case is a very bizarre one, but it is not one that is unheard of. There are lots of people in this world who may have started out following Christ and may still call themselves Christians, but they have wandered so far from God, they have engaged in behavior so heinous that they have given up their connection with God. The Bible warns about people like that. Jesus even mentioned them. Not everyone who calls me Lord, Lord will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who do the will of my Father. There are a lot of people in this world. A lot of people in this world who talk about God like they know him, or claim that they go to church every Sunday, and yet their hearts are so far from God. And that, I think, is the scariest part of the Bible. Not the book of Revelation, not all the prophecies. Those don't scare me nearly as much as that line, that not all who call me Lord will enter the kingdom of God. And I always am scared. Am I one of those? That's the fear. That's what scares me. Samson has just demonstrated his place in that connection. But let's keep going, guys. Like I said, we got to get to our lowest. Judges 16, 21 through 22. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it was shaved. These two verses side by side fascinate me. Verse 21 shows us an image of absolute and total defeat. Samson has his eyes gouged out, shackled in bronze, bound up, and then dragged to Gaza to push a mill in a prison as his punishment. But then in verse 22, but the hair on his head began to grow again after he was put in prison. His hair was growing back. There is still hope for Samson. Guys, this is the true message of Samson. The message laid out clear as day. When you are at your lowest, God can still reach you. Keep in mind who Samson is and what he's done. This man has served himself and only himself for the vast majority of his life, and it has brought him to a bitter and dark place of defeat and depravity. And yet, the hair that has been shaved, the covenant that had been sacrificed, can still be restored. Samson was brought to his lowest point, and do you know what probably happened? He probably self-reflected and said, how much of this was my fault? You know, I had an interesting thought while I was doing this Bible study. Why do you think Samson went to Delilah in the first place? Why do you think he went to a prostitute? Why do you think he went to get some loving? Why do you think he was so desperate for a bit of fun, fetishy play? Because I think that deep down, Samson seeks gratification. He lives a very bitter life, a very selfish life, a very childish life, always chasing after the next big thrill, the next big thing, not once ever looking to God for what God wants him to do, but more looking for, how can I benefit? What can I get out of this? How can I be happy and fulfilled? And so he runs to a prostitute. He runs to Delilah to get that. And we see how that works out. Guys, when we run away from God's will for our lives, it never leads to anything good. And now we see what it's led for Samson. And now Samson, having come to the lowest point, having been broken, having lost it all, is finally starting to understand. Took him long enough. Turn to verse 23. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain. While they were in high spirits, they shouted, bring out Samson to entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison and performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them. So let's talk about that for just a second. The Philistines are all gathered together. The 5 Philistine leaders are celebrating. We caught Samson. And we're about to have a big celebratory feast in honor of Dagon, our God, in our temple. Let's all gather and mock Samson and have him perform for us like a clown. Now, when I say perform, I don't mean that he does silly little tricks. I mean, they whip him, they beat him, they throw things at him, they make him dance. They probably strip him down naked. This is not a performance just for them, just for him to be goofy and silly. This is a performance to humiliate him further. To basically say, you've treated us bad this whole time, now we're gonna treat you bad. And everyone gets to watch. So I want to make sure you understood. This was not meant to just be an all jest. This was meant to hurt Samson. Now, the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson reached towards the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. Wow. So let's break that down a little bit. To give you something of an idea of the scene, the Temple of Dagon is now loaded up with tons of people. Just 3,000 people on the roof alone, and all 5 of the Philistine leaders are inside. This place is packed with Philistines, all excited to watch Samson entertain them. But Samson asked to lean on the pillars and finally said a prayer. In spite of Samson's past, in spite of all he'd done, God still answered his prayer and destroyed the pagan temple and worshipers. God still loved him. He was still willing to hear Samson's prayer of confession and repentance and use him this final time. See, one of the effects of sin in our lives is to keep us from feeling like praying. And believe me, I understand this because I deal with it sometimes. Sometimes we have to think like, man, I don't pray nearly enough. I don't. There are times I just do not pray when I probably should. You realize that Samson's only prayed to God twice in his entire life that we've read? Once to just whine and say, "Give me water," and now this time. But perfect moral behavior is not a condition for prayer. Don't let guilty feelings over sin keep you from your only means of restoration. No matter how long you've been away from God, He is ready to hear from you and restore you to a right relationship. Every situation can be salvaged if you're willing to turn again to Him. If God could still work for Samson, He could certainly make something worthwhile work for you. This is what I want to leave you with, guys. We're going to go ahead and wrap up there because the last part of the story of Samson is about how his parents went to retrieve his body. But I want you to know something. Samson killed more Philistines in that one instance than he's killed in his entire life. He was a hero. To many people of the Jews, he was a hero. But we know more about him than they do, don't we? We've wrapped up the story of Samson, guys. And now that we know Samson's full story, what can we say about him? He was a fool. Oh, no, there's no question about that. He was a childish fool, a child in an adult's body. He was selfish. He was greedy. He was lustful. He threw temper tantrums when he didn't get his way. He made jokes out of his sins. He drew other people into his sinful lifestyle. He caused pain and harm to many, many people. He did not take responsibility for his actions. He was vengeful. He saw himself as the victimized and the righteous all at the same time, even when he had clearly done wrong. He had no problem taking an eye for an eye. And he fell for the same lustful tricks again and again. In many ways, he should not be a hero. He should be a person we look at and say, "You are an awful individual." And it's easy for us to say that about Samson. So let me ask you a question. If someone were to put your life story in the Bible, would we say the same thing about you? Believe me, if they put my life story in the Bible, they'd probably say similar things about me. I've done bad things in my life. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've fallen away from God and spent long periods of time distant from God. There are times I walk through periods of my life where I really don't behave like I should, where I make mistakes and I do wrong, and sometimes I even know I do wrong and I do it anyway. I struggle with some sins, guys, I really do, and I'll bet some of you too as well. But here's the hope that Samson offers. Even for someone as depraved as Samson, even for someone as lost, selfish, lustful, greedy, vengeful as Samson, God can still be there. God is still waiting to hear your voice. God is still waiting for you to come back to Him. God is still listening for your prayer. Sometimes, in order for us to reach the point where we do that, we have to be broken. We have to be shattered. Sometimes for God to really reach us, sometimes for us to really understand God, we have to be broken, like Samson was. Do you think that Samson could have come to God naturally and rightfully the way he was always living when he was at his peak? No, because Samson didn't see a need then. He still thought that it was all his power, all his strength, all him. He never once thought that maybe it was God all along. Not until God stepped back and said, "All right, Samson, you've chosen Delilah over me. Let's see how far that gets you." But God still answered his prayer in the end and delivered him his greatest victory. Samson is a great case study of how not to live your life, of how not to be. But he's also a warning. Much like our Bible series in the story of David, Samson reveals to us, just like David did, our own flaws, our own shortcomings. I'd argue Samson's worse than David in a lot of ways. But you know what? Sometimes we are Samsons, just childish adults. After the election results on Donald Trump, I've seen a lot of it. A lot of childish adults. The tantrums and screaming and crying and threats from people online because the election did or did not go the way they wanted. I'm looking at the world right now, and I think it's a fitting time to talk about Samson because I think we have a lot of Samsons in our day-to-day life. And some of you listening to this right now may be thinking about yourself and saying, okay, you know what, Raven, maybe I am a bit like Samson. And don't feel bad. Me too. There are times I'm just like Samson. But if you're thinking that, if you're aware of it, that is a good sign. It means that you're aware. It means that you are capable of looking at yourself and going, you know, maybe I do need to turn myself around. And that is a good thing. It's time to reach out to God. Say a prayer to the Lord. Ask God, please, show me where I'm messing up. Help remove temptation from me. Help me overcome it. And help me come back to you in faith. If you need to talk to someone that you trust as a spiritual counselor or friend, I talk to Jay, my brother, my father, quite a lot when I can't get to a church. But who can do that for you in your life? Who can you talk to? When can you pray to God and thank Him for the gifts He's given you and ask Him to help restore you? Samson is a warning, but he's also a message of hope. That is the story of Samson. Thank you guys so much for watching this. This was a wonderful Bible study series. Thank you for watching this full 30-minute long video. I hope you got something from it. Let me know down in the comments what you think about Samson, what you learned from this series. Would love to hear it in the comments section. God bless all of you. I hope you have a wonderful week. I will see you next Sunday for a brand new Bible study series, or I might take next Sunday off so that I can, rest a little bit and do some reading, because next time we will be starting on the parables of Jesus. We'll be talking about Jesus' parables. I'm really excited for that. And guys, I hope you have a wonderful week. Take care, guys. See you next time.